Will you pray with me? Gracious and loving God, we come before you having sung your praises, having offered our prayers, and having read from your holy word. Now, O God, as we seek to interpret your word, be with us, guide us, help us, and protect us, that the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts together will be acceptable in your sight. For you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. You're getting the abbreviated version. We ran a little long this morning. We started a little late. That's okay. That just means I get to leave out a story and life will go on. This story we have read from Luke. This story about the 10 lepers that were cleansed. I want to give you a little context before we dive in, because it's an odd place that we are in the Gospel of Luke. In the 17th chapter, we have this collection of stories that, oddly enough, are connected to nothing else. That's really, really weird for Luke, because Luke usually connects all the stories and groups them, and then all of a sudden, in this chapter, we have this group of stories that don't relate to each other. They're just, oh, by the way, I need to tell you this, stories. Last week, we had an, oh, by the way, I need to tell you this story. I just didn't tell you that part yet. I was saving that tidbit for today. Today, we also have one of these. And in this case, so we have to deal with this story in complete isolation. It is not helpful to necessarily tie it to what was going on before or ask ourselves where we are, but instead to look at this in one encapsulated moment. So, this story is more troubling than you think. This story is more troubling than you think it is, not only because of the obvious thing. I mean, 10 lepers are calling out to Jesus, and Jesus gives them instructions. What were his instructions again? Go to the priests. Right. Do they go to the priests? Not necessarily. 9 do, maybe. They were headed that way. They were headed that way, and as they're walking along towards the priest, they look out and go, well, I'll be, or something close to that. And 9 continue on their way somewhere. Maybe they go to the priests, maybe they don't. We don't get that piece of the story. But we get the one, the Samaritan. Why would it be important to call out that the one was a Samaritan? Here, I'll save you some time. It is implied, therefore, that some might not have been, right? That this was a very odd grouping of at least one Samaritan with non-Samaritan, or more likely, Hebrew lepers. Now, you know, when the battles of your nations take over for the rest of the world, but you are isolated by your physical condition, suddenly those politics don't matter much. What matters is, where am I safe? Where am I connected? Where am I able to be accepted? We don't know the mix of those that were healed. What we know is one came back to say thank you. And say thank you to Jesus in particular, and to praise Jesus. And Jesus asks, and the Greek in here, I think, is more faithfully translated. And the other 9, they are where? Well, it's not fair to this one who came back to even ask that question, is it? I don't know. I mean, let's play with this story a little bit. This poor Samaritan who is here praising Jesus for doing exactly what they all called out to do, praising him for granting that gift of healing, and he gets encountered immediately with, hey, where are your buddies? I don't know. They went to play baseball. There was 9 of them. Oh, Bob's not on the kit. I don't know where they are. And it doesn't matter. Because remember, we're dealing with this story in isolation, and we're dealing with a story that deals with a whole bunch of layers of what's really going on. For all we know, in fairness to Ron's answer, they went on to the priests, they discovered they were healed, they knelt down in the synagogue, and they praised God and glorified God, and all was well. Right? That's a possible ending to this story. What is disturbing to me is another possible ending is one remains healed. Notice Jesus' statement at the end. Go in peace, your faith has made you well. And the other 9 suddenly were not so well? We don't know. But I think it's valid to wrestle with the idea of what we understand the nature of Jesus to be. Let me make this simple and direct. Do you believe in a Jesus who heals someone, that someone doesn't come back and say thank you specifically to him, and so he says, no, never mind. I don't either. I was looking to see if there were any nods, so I had to change my narrative real quick. But I don't either. And this story makes no sense in the light of the whole of the gospel if Jesus were to somehow pull away that healing. The only thing that makes sense then is for us to pause and say, look how much more pleased Jesus is with the one who sought to be thankful. Not that Jesus will remove a blessing when we fail to, but how much more is there when we do remember to be thankful. That's important. That's important because we live in a society that isn't real good at being thankful right now. We live in a society where we rush to debate before we even know what the other person really wants to say or feels. Maybe I'm the only flawed one in this room right now that sometimes assumes unfairly that the person in front of me, because I know, say, their politics, is going to hold a position that I'm going to be opposed to. So I walk into a conversation ready to debate. I'm sure I'm the only one that does that. Walks in loaded for bear. Let's do this. I'm ready. Bring it on. And that's sad. And that's something I'm working on in me. Because a thankful spirit, one who recognizes that God has created all kinds of healings of flaws in me and continues to work on me, needs to also be thankful enough to, well, be open to actually hearing what others say. This week was National Coming Out Day. All over the nation, there are people who came to terms with their own identity and sexuality boldly enough to be able to say so. And a lot of those folks were not met with love and acceptance. They were met with hatefulness, fear, rejection. Where I stand, that's just not okay. But I can't fix that. I can't physically go to each one that rejects some beloved child of God and say to them, you need to get your mind right. There's too many, and I don't know them all, for starters. The part that makes me sad, and I realize this message is not necessarily for you, but maybe for those you encounter through the week, is those same poor souls may find themselves seeking the presence of God in a church that rejects them in the same way. This story of this healing, this encounter with Jesus, with those that have lumped together regardless of politics because they are in a human situation that makes them unacceptable to the rest of society and reach out to Jesus Christ for acceptance and healing, there is good news because Jesus says yes. As a church, we're called to say yes to. But what if they're not thankful to us? We still say yes. We don't ask where they are. We simply ask for God to make sure each one knows that in our eyes, they are a beloved child of God. Whole, healed, and full in their awareness. Every once in a while, I get into a group of pastors and we talk about our churches. It's kind of like a mom's group talking about her kids. And the question I get is, oh, you're an open and affirming church, that's great. How many LGBTIQ people do you have in your congregation? Well, I can build an argument for a couple, but not really. Well, then how's that making a difference? So let's talk about all of the members of my congregation who are family of those, or friends of those who have come to an understanding of their created identity as opposed to what society has labeled them with. Let's talk about those folks, because this church has a number of us with family members that we love deeply, that we believe fully are accepted by Christ, that we believe fully are loved by God. And we need to remind ourselves of that, because it's important. So to over-extrapolate for just a second, where are the LGBTIQ folks? Please God, wherever there is a priest that's offering them a sense of healing and wholeness and knowledge that they are beloved. But here, we're just going to be sure in the knowledge that our faith and the faith of those we love makes us well. May God reassure us as we seek to share that good news with all we meet. Amen.